Hi there, HDFS 107 students. I'm sorry I can't make it down my steep hill today, but I hope this little lecture and then forum activity will give you some good things to chew on and think about. I'm just going to make this pretty casual, just going to be doing it in one take and sharing a few thoughts with you that are related to your text readings. So, in terms of thinking about human services and faith based, one of the concepts I want you to think about is, in general, how human services is holistic in its approach. We've talked about this all term. We started by looking at how, with Bronfenbrenner's theory, we nest the individual in the family, in the community, and in the broader social world. Similarly, we want to look at the whole human being. And typically, when you take a development course, like many of you have taken child development, adolescent development, you're going to see physical, social, emotional, cognitive. But many people would also consider spirituality as a part of that holistic approach. So I just want you to play with that idea, think about it. What is your view? Which theories would you use that would help you look at that whole human being? I'd also like you to think about these two words, religion and spirituality. And if we were in class, I'd give you a little time to reflect and maybe do a free write about these terms and how they fit in your life. Because as is everything in human services, it's always important to understand yourself before you work with your clients. Okay, so here's just a couple perspectives for you, a couple terms. The holistic perspective about the whole human being and how everything is connected. Religiousness, spirituality, and holistic health. I'll let you read those. Now, some important data. What I want you to think about is, or know about, is some of the data around spirituality. So basically, personal spirituality, different from religiousness, but of course can be highly related, can be linked to a decrease in depression, an increase of social support, increase in cognitive functioning, improvement in being able to cope with crises and stress, and better ability to deal with abuse and addiction. So this research roundup comes from your textbook, so you probably saw that in your textbook. So if we were just paying attention to that data, then we might want to say, wow, this is really important. This is something we should absolutely be integrating into our human services. But then we run into our essential dilemma, which is taking that important knowledge that we have and comparing it to, number one, our need to stay client-centered. So with some clients, incorporating spirituality or religiosity would be very easy because that might be something they're already incorporating in their life. But if we're truly client-centered, then we also have to pay attention to the person who either isn't incorporating it or may actually actively not wish to incorporate it. So how do we balance that along with what we know in terms of it helping human beings? And along with that, we have to be aware of the code of ethics. Actually, I'm going to skip down to that slide and show that to you. So basically, when we think about the code of ethics, which is something we must adhere to as human service professionals, we have to remember that we need to provide services without discriminating. And that includes on religion. So that puts a dilemma in a faith-based setting in terms of how we interact with human beings if they're not participating in that faith-based setting and it involves human services. Also, some religious services may, religious denominations do have strongly held beliefs about the LGBTQ community in particular. And so that can also come into conflict with the ethical standards if there is any discrimination based on that social characteristic. So, in terms of you as a professional, there are two things you really need to have. You do need to have some religious literacy. And for this reason, I actually recommend that in one of your requirements for your associate's degree, you do choose a religion course. Whether or not you are religious personally, this will allow you that little bit more of that macro view, looking at multiple religions and understanding the meaning of religion in society. Whether or not you're religious, we have to be, the awareness that this is very important, very central to many of our clients. So being literate in terms of religion is important. And then that self-awareness, awareness of your own beliefs, being aware that you're not pressing those on someone, even implicitly, even without realizing it, especially in our society, which is heavily Christian dominant. Sometimes we're not even aware that that we're giving out those messages without meaning to. Just some casual things like calling something Christmas break instead of winter break, for example. So we have to have a lot of self-awareness when it comes to religion. Okay, so those are the ethical standards. Oh, also, there's the link if you want to read the full ethical standards document. And I do recommend that, especially if you're going on in human services. And you will be using that quite a bit when you get into your practicum. But these are just a couple of the standards. The whole document is very holistic. Just to give you a little sense of does the federal legislation, how does the government play a role in terms of human services and religious organizations? Historically, religious organizations were a really big source of how the community cared for people that need help, who had mental health, physical health, were poor, etc. The religious community played a really big part. As our country developed over time and became more industrialized and communities were not as strong, the government started doing more of that caring for people. Of course, families have always played a role throughout time, but a singular family sometimes cannot provide for all its members. So in the past, religious organizations did play a really big role. As the government got more involved, it became important to do some separation so that the government wasn't funding religious activities that also were human service activities for exactly the reasons of discrimination that we just talked about. So if you want to know more, you can click on this link that tells you more about the government's role in what's called faith-based and neighborhood centers. And this slideshow is in your Moodle shell, so you can get to those things. There tends to be, conflicts and controversies, a lot of awareness about this. And then the other factor in terms of the legal part is, can a religious organization how does that interact with politics and taxes? And so that's a very interesting question. Religious organizations are not supposed to be putting forward political views, especially if they are tax exempt. But those laws continue to be definitely challenged and changed politically. And in May 2017, President Trump signed an executive order that, as he originally put forward, was going to give churches a lot more ability to do political type campaigning and awareness. And I realize your screen isn't showing this at all, so I'm just going to go back to the slideshow. But ended up disappointing some of the more conservative religious groups in terms of how far the executive order actually went. So it's always interesting. Just, you may say as a human service worker, well, I don't want to pay attention to politics. That's not part of my job. But actually, really, it is. These things do affect you and the people you work with. So in closing, I just have a couple questions for you to consider. And do you think faith-based settings fit in with the Human Services Ethical Code? Can they? How would that look? How would that play out? What would it look like? And the second question is, how are you going to balance your own spiritual and religious beliefs with the research about spirituality and also the code of ethics? So, hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.